what I'd like to start with in this conversation is when you were a little girl, because you came into the world pretty aware, pretty open, sentient, and you were able to see things into other dimensions. You also were deeply connected to nature.
Yeah.
All animals, the farm, horses, everything around you. That really was your truth. So let's go back to a day with your grandmother in which you were very little and you saw things that ideally no child or no person should ever have to see.
I didn't remember until the last couple of years what I saw as a young person, because by the time I was 7 or 8 years old, I'd shut down that psychic vision. But my grandmother was a very self-centered, apparently very materialistic, greedy woman. And I didn't ever know her, but because by the time I became verbal and conscious, she was pretty much nonverbal and shut down with Parkinson's disease. But I remembered in the last couple of years when I started investigating interdimensional forces and, well, I'll use the word demonic forces because that's so popularized. But
Yeah.
and I started remembering and recovering early childhood memories, and I remember watching what looked like black snakes behind her eyes. I remember seeing her eyes and something move behind her eyes, and it wasn't her. And I also remember the impression of black snakes over her body, fundamentally sucking her energy, her life force, her mental and emotional energies. And I realized in retrospect, it was one of the reasons I spent so much time outdoors, trying to get away from the house, because none of my parents, my grandfather wasn't aware of this phenomenon, but I sure was. And there was no validation, and I was just freaked out. And so it's just been astonishing, Regina, having a new worldview that is actually a very old, ancient worldview, and coming into the realization that there are inimical forces on this planet working against us. And then coming to that perspective, waking up and going, aha, and then so much clicks from the past.
Yes.
Makes sense where it didn't make sense before, and there was not a pattern or an explanation that was logical to explain it. So
yeah, and like a lot of people, you had to go through your own kind of dark journey. There was you were successful, you were in network television back when, and had many successful aspects to your career, your mind, and all of that, but your own kind of ancestral kind of dysfunction playing itself out through you, like almost everybody. This is just part of it. And these forces have also been with us throughout many, 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 many generations of ancestors. So whether we're imprinted on our DNA or imprinted by other beings, it's happening.
yeah.
I hope you're enjoying this video, because if you are, there are dozens more like it on my site, all supported by people like you. So if you'd like to keep this work rolling in and join our community, just click on the Patreon button at reginameredith.com. That also gives you access to insider commentary, my live book club, and other live events with special guests. So join in. Thanks. Everyone knows when they're a kid what's right and wrong. I mean, the problem is that we started hoodwinking ourselves as to what is acceptable and what is not acceptable.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I would like you to just talk. You call this an anti-life force, which I think is a very appropriate thing to say. We don't have to name any groups of beings. We don't have to name anything. It's an anti-life form. I couldn't agree with you more. It is truly anti-life.
Yeah.
So talk about your perception of what this is. We'll get into a few examples and then get into the breaking free part of it.
One of the things when I first started the research, because what kicked all of this off was the COVID years when the world went insane. And at that point, I moved out of what I can only call my spirituality bubble, where I'm always positive and everything is focused on the light and a lot of, getting out there to God and spirits above me and all that. And all of a sudden, it was like I just slammed to earth and went, what the heck is going on? What is really going on here? Holy Moses, this is gnarly. And so I did the research, and of course I was shocked I ran away from the whole idea of the devil because the church made it sound so ludicrous. It's like I wasn't going to believe in something with, red skin and forked tail and horns. And I mean, good heavens. But how shocking it was to realize that for thousands of years, every culture, every civilization on every continent on this planet has a name and a description of these beings. The Native Americans called it Wetiko or Wendigo. The Native Hawaiian kahunas call it the Eepa. Carl Jung called it Entomimos, the Antichrist force on this planet. Of course, the Greeks, the ancient Greeks called them the archons, the evil whispering ones. And so that was a big shock to realize, oh my heavens, this presence has not only been here for thousands of years, but we've all known about it for thousands of years. Which immediately, raised all the question marks in my mind. Is like, well, heck, if this has been around for uncounted thousands of years, it is inimical and dragging us down. Why don't we, and we know about it, why don't we know about it?
Right. And then we can do something about it. If we know about it, we can do something about it.
Exactly.
Sadly, we have been conditioned for so long. It's like the boiling frog syndrome. Things get a little bit ugly, a little bit uglier, a little bit uglier. Pretty soon we're not seeing ugly when it's sitting right in front of us. We're not seeing something that's wrong when it's sitting right in front of us. We don't do anything when we can to rectify these things when it's sitting right in front of us, and for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely. And that was the next chapter, of my research was, well, okay, if it's been here and we've known about it, why, what's going on that's keeping it from doing something about it? And, the first stop was religion and realizing that my impressions as a little girl about how ludicrous the teachings in Christianity are about the devil. The devil made me do it. And I was like, well, that doesn't wash. So the very context of silly stories like, one man and one woman populated the earth without committing incest. And
I had a problem with that when I was 5.
and snakes in the garden with apples and all of that stuff.
And so, Eve was the bad one.
and so I could just I could brush it all aside because it was silly stuff. And so making something ridiculous is one way to do it. But then, of course, it's made to look so scary that even if it wasn't ridiculous, you really don't want to go there because it really is scary if I went there. And then, of course, I got into the whole spirituality, New Age spirituality movement in the 80s. And the whole focus was on getting out of my body and up and out to the light of God or my higher self or the Christ self or that. And don't look at the dark. Think positively. What was the name of that book? You Can't Afford the Luxury of a Negative Thought. I think that came out like in 1988 or something like that. And I remember looking at the book in the bookstores going, well, I'm sunk.
Oh, I'm a sinner.
which was a negative thought right there that I caught in the store. And I was like, you see, I can't. So between making this presence silly, ludicrous, and bizarre, or frightening, or just don't look at it because the antidote is just to be positive and wrap yourself in white light, then we never deal with this. It never becomes real. We never really truly understand what it is. So therefore, lurking in the shadows, it remains obscure, but it also keeps its frightening tone. Because if I have to be so positive and wrap myself in white light all the time, well, then obviously I'm afraid of that. And I'm only afraid because I haven't investigated and really discovered what I'm dealing with. And when I turned around, Regina, and looked at this and understood what I'm dealing with, what we're all dealing with, oh my God, the power came back. The gloves were off, and I was like, oh my God, this presence doesn't have enough power to pick up a piece of paper. It's a non-physical.
That's the thing. It has to live through us. It's interdimensional.
Yep.
And it has to live through our emotions, our feelings, our thoughts in our bodies. So it has to be able to have access to us and co-opt us. Yep. And usually we give it that access willingly because we've been taught we're less than, we're sinners. We're we're evil at heart, but we're trying to find our way back to the light. None of that have I ever believed. I don't believe it. I've never believed it. Not since I was a little kid in Sunday school. So that's baloney. We're lucky that we don't believe that. But many people do believe there's something superior to them that they have to answer to, and that ultimately when they die, they're going to have to answer to that and even worse. So let's talk about that thing that conditioned us, that and the ways it conditioned us, that we have to feel that we have to bow before.
Oh, wow. Well, that's the whole religious teaching, that there's some greater authority than what we are. We say we're children of God, which means we're the same as the parent, except we're not the parent. We're just the next generation. Well, here's where the whole insidious methodology of how the archons, that's pretty much, or the anti-life force, works, is it's insinuation. It is interpenetration into wherever there's a crack, wherever we're wounded, wherever there's trauma, mental trauma, emotional trauma, physical trauma, spiritual trauma, all the above trauma. And so it is an influencer, highly intelligent, but very binary and very black and white. And the reason I called it anti-life was the more I read about these intelligences, is the less easy it was to pinpoint exactly what they are. What's the word? Chimerical? They're the shapeshifters. It's almost like whatever you're most frightened of, that's how they show up. Which is interesting when we take a look, of course, at media and all of the visual programming of, alien this and psychotic, shower scenes and demons and, the images that have been implanted in our brains. So we just don't go there. But the agenda is to instill fear, so that, and the deeper agenda is, as I said, they're non-physical, they have no power, have to work through us. So therefore, I realized the gig is to convince us that we're what it is, that we are aggressive, violent, insatiable,
Warlike,
greedy, warlike, callous, indifferent to pain and suffering. Because all these beings, cynical. These beings, they can't express or vibrate to higher elevated emotions like love, awe, wonder, the joy. They can feed off of those emotions, but they don't understand those emotions.
The only access point is that lower frequency range of fear or greed, or whatever that baser emotion of humanity, those baser emotions that we possess are. That seems to be the vibrational access point. Because we've heard from many people that these beings from other places come and they feed on fear.
Yeah.
And but I see it a little differently. The access point is fear, so they can feed on everything else within our personal buffet. All of the denser stuff.
Lower emotions, because they're operating. I mean, if we're going to do higher and lower here, from a frequency perspective, they're operating down here in the subpar basement range. So the trick is to lower our light. How can I convince you to not be a being of pure love? Right. How can I warp your mind and twist things so that you forget that you're a spirit? So how can I convince you that you're guilty, filled with shame, that the very fact that you've been brought into a body is a corrupt thing, that you're a piece of poo and you're never gonna amount to anything? And what was I taught in the church was that I'm not worthy enough to gather up the crumbs from underneath thy table, Lord.
Which church did you go to?
I was in the Episcopal Church. So, and then I went to Catholic convent school through high school. So I got my fair share. And so I was shocked, actually, coming out the other side of this in the last couple of years, Regina, how deeply subconsciously I'd bought into the original sin theme. I was shocked at the level, because only when I took the blinders off and turned around and looked at this influence that was trying to convince me that I am a low frequency, devilish, demonic, horrible being, only when I saw that, oh my God, that's what it is. Oh my God, that's not what I am. I am a being of pure love. It was like it was like 40 years of New Age teachings about being a spirit being of love. Finally, I didn't have to convince myself. I knew it. I knew it because I took the shadow out of myself and stopped believing it, that I was this shameful one. And that has been the most empowering. That's why I wrote the book. It was like, oh my God, I have been so liberated from fear and from programming and all of that when I finally saw not only was I being manipulated, but how I was being manipulated. Well, and then of course there's the why we're being manipulated, which is ultimately to be able to take over physical embodiment and possess what we've got. But it's got to drag us down to its level to do it.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you might also want to consider joining Patreon, which allows me to keep all of this content free and available to everyone. And if you're looking for like-minded souls, you might also enjoy my online community called Our Neighborhood. Links to join are in the description.